Well, good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to another noon seminar in our series at the East European Studies here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Today we're honored to have as our guests two very prominent, eminent journalists and authors and experts on the Balkans, Duško Dodor and Louise Branson, who, as you know, if only from the exhibit outside, are the recent co-authors of a book, a biography on Milošević, Portrait of a Tyrant. It's now out in the bookstores, of course, and it is the first full-length treatment of Milošević, I believe, at least in English. You know, you had dribs and drabs here and there and analyses on the run, but this is the first book-length treatment. They are very, I think, qualified to deal with this subject. Duško Dodor having been, I guess, a lifelong Yugoslav expert, Washington Post correspondent there, author of the book The Russians. Louise Branson is currently the Washington correspondent for the Scotsman of Edinburgh, and from 1990, I believe, to 1996, during the heart of the post-Yugoslav wars, was the chief Balkan correspondent, and they have also co-authored a book on Mr. Gorbachev in the Soviet Union, as well as, I guess, and then Duško has done another book by himself on Soviet politics. Today, they will address the issue of Milošević as a stumbling block to peace and stability in Yugoslavia and the Balkans. I think maybe we can all agree on that. They will, this has been advertised, I think, as a 12-to-1 seminar, as we traditionally do have, but this will go a little longer for those of you who are able to stay, and will go as long as 1:30. If there's interest. They will speak for about 20 minutes each, to be followed by 40 to 45 minutes of questions. Duško will go first and will address the current issues of Serbia, Kosovo, and Milošević. And Ms. Branson will go next and look at the future, next steps, and the growing gulf between the United States and its allies in approach to the Balkans. And so now I'll turn the floor over to Duško Dodor to begin.
I guess I will do it from here. It's an honor and privilege for me to address this meeting, particularly the Woodrow Wilson Center, as we launch our book, which was published officially just 2 days ago. I've been twice a fellow of the Woodrow Wilson Center, although not in these opulent surroundings. I used to be up in the castle across the mall. And I remember that the first book I did while being a fellow of the Woodrow Wilson Center was about Yugoslavia. I've just come back from a tour of duty in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe. And the first sentence in that book, called The Yugoslavs, was that Yugoslavia is a country where anything can happen, and usually does. And I thought I was kind of stretching it a bit, because it was an odd country, and things did happen, all kinds of things that usually didn't happen. But I did not believe, when we came back to Yugoslavia in 1990, that all these things would happen that happened, that you all are familiar with. I also think it's an appropriate forum to address the issue of Yugoslavia and what happened there at the Wilson Center, because President Wilson has always been one of my heroes. Like many people who originate in an unfortunate part of the world, it was Woodrow Wilson who articulated hopes of a new age, a world without wars, in which governments ruled with consent of the governed, and in which peace is based on justice. It seems to me that these ideals, the Wilsonian ideals, have influenced, or at least helped shape policy of all subsequent American presidents. Whenever American presidents used power abroad, they did so in the name of peace and justice. to do the right thing. The right thing being to change the world for the better. And I think it's quite interesting that when President Clinton launched attacks on Yugoslavia in March of this year, early in the morning of March 25th, he called Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. He couldn't sleep. And I'll reproduce the part of the conversation which bears on this idea. He wanted to be reassured that he was doing the right thing. I feel we have explored every option, that we are doing the right thing, he said. I feel the same way, Mr. President, replied Albright. Critics of the Wilsonian vision may raise legitimate questions, particularly in the aftermath of Kosovo, when now Albanians are killing the Serbs, while before the Serbs are killing Albanians. Does America have the power to do good around the world, or indeed knows with certainty what good is? To change the question a different way, by bombing Serbian cities and killing people, both Serbs and Albanians, we committed evils to achieve a higher good. Except you may ask, are we sure that this good is higher? But assuming that Kosovo was an example of the elusive dream to use power to do good, the question again remains, a larger question remains, whether a purely humanitarian foreign policy is possible. Why didn't we act in Rwanda, for instance? But whatever the answers is, and the hardliners, the critics of the Wilsonian vision, among them Henry Kissinger, for instance, who complained about this legacy, well, they may say, it seems to me that this kind of attitude towards the word, to change it for the better, is what makes the United States different from the rest of the world, where much of the central dilemma of politics is the tension between power and goodness. Which brings me to the subject of our hero of our book, and the role the individuals play in history. The misfortune in much of the less developed world is that you have a situation that if one is ruthless enough to gain power, he probably lacks any kind of idealism to change it for the better. And conversely, a good man who comes to power is unlikely to command enough force to translate his ideas into reality. But there are spectacular exceptions, and I want you to take a look at that, because just consider the case of Nelson Mandela. We were all familiar with the situation in South Africa throughout the century. And what were the real conditions for rapprochement in South Africa between the races, if you look as a political scientist at the reality of at the factors that political scientists or sociologists usually take into account? They were very negligible. And here you have a man who, after 28 years in a white jail, comes out and has the magnanimity and political imagination to extend his hand to others, to embrace them, to work together. Look at the idea of retribution. We don't know whether the Truth Commission is really going to ultimately work, but it's an extremely imaginative approach to healing social rifts. Of course, you're not bringing people to justice in a traditional sense, but if you have to admit in front of your children, grandchildren, parents, and friends that you were a murderer and do so publicly, it's a form of judicial punishment, it seems to me, that does not rift the society apart. And I imagine a man like Milošević, had he come to power instead of Mr. Mandela in South Africa, a man full of hatred and seeking retribution. Mr. Milošević is a uniquely sinister figure, I must say. And I'll try to give you a few examples in terms of what I mean and why is it so. It's a man marked almost exclusively by the lust of power. And it's also a man, together with his wife, who come from a very strange background, personal background. I think it has something to do with the behavior of these people. In his own family, both of his parents committed suicide. His favorite uncle committed suicide. In her family, and we are talking about partners in power, like, Nicholas and Alexandra and Ceausescu and Eleni and people like that. Her background is even weirder because her mother was a communist who was arrested during World War II by the Gestapo in Belgrade when Mira was only 9 months old. Her father was a communist hero who survived the war. Her mother, at the end of the war, was arrested and executed by the communists because under torture in prison, she betrayed the party organization, and that led to many arrests. In other words, this girl grew up feeling, having a stain on her background. Her father abandoned her and formed a new family. So these two soulmates met in high school in a small town of Požarevac and fell in love and became self-absorbed, both emotionally bruised and self-absorbed. But they knew what they wanted. And long before Milošević ever came to power, almost 20 years to a day before he came to power, she had told her cousin, just after Milošević and his wife got married, she had told her cousin, while they were looking in a shop window where Tito's pictures were everywhere, she had told her, Slobodan's picture is going to be there one day. And her cousin says, what do you mean it's going to be there? And sure enough, it is there now. Mira, I want to give you a background because she's an extremely influential person. Is an extrovert, loves limelight, writes articles, which she puts together into books. And in a dictatorship, this is something extraordinary, where the wife is a columnist. Wife of the dictator is a columnist. So, of course, the entire bureaucracy reads the column very carefully. And since she professes to like astrology, people have dubbed this column the horoscope. The horoscope is a very powerful column because if it fingers an official and says that he's incompetent, sure enough, this guy is gone within a week or two. If it says somebody should become an ambassador to China, of course the man goes to China as ambassador. So unlike most astrologers and columnists, this woman has the capacity to actually make her predictions come true. But the observation is sort of weird because I like one particular column where she talks about astrology and says, quote, "I often say with a mixture of sadness and irony that things that some governments or some ministries cannot resolve may be resolved by the stars." Now, this is really a profound thought. What is peculiar about this woman who professes to be a communist is that her ideological moorings are very weak, basically. And the regime in Belgrade is one of gangsters, economic profiteers who benefit from the Yugoslav closed market. And when Mira was publicly criticized by a former Marxist professor that the number of these new rich people in her party is something that shows that there's something wrong with the ideology, her answer was very glib. She said Friedrich Engels was an industrialist too, but he was also a communist, referring to Engels, who was a co-author with Karl Marx of the Manifesto, Communist Manifesto. Milošević, on the other hand, is an introvert who runs the country from his hip pocket. Time and again, I've talked to American officials who were talking to him and who were subsequently embarrassed to talk to Milošević's foreign minister because he had no clue what was going on. They had to brief him. The extent to which the power is concentrated in the hands of one man. I want to give you an illustration because when they have elected a novelist, a nationalist novelist, as president of Yugoslavia in 1992, Milošević selected him basically. And this man, Ćosić, with a novelist's eye, describes the situation of the transfer of power from a collective presidency to himself, the new president. So he's gone into Tito's former office, which is the size of the basketball court, with a battery of telephones. And there are these two guys who were members of the collective presidency, and he says, what's there to be transferred? What unfinished business he has to deal with? And he replies, we have nothing to submit and nothing to leave. The secretary, Nada, knows everything. She'll tell you. They were rushing to catch the plane. And Ćosić says he was left alone in the vast room behind all these telephones, and the secretary, Nada, came in and explained how to use these phones. And then comes an interesting point. What does Ćosić do first? And he says he cannot explain it himself. He begins by phoning and summoning to his office first the chief of military police, then the chief of general staff, and then chief of the federal police, in that order. And he said he could not explain to himself why the chief of the military police. I can explain to you. Because the military police, known as KOS in Yugoslavia since World War II, was the most reliable instrument of power. The civilian police are enforcers and so forth. Military police does not go beat up people and so forth. The thugs do that. But this was the most important instrument of power in Yugoslavia. Milošević, of course, has been many times in the United States, knows something about America, and of course knows about our insistence on democracy. So the first elections in Yugoslavia were really wonderful because free elections in 1990. They were really democratic elections because he created 100 parties, not 2 or 3. And there were 30-some plus guys running for president. But he fractured the body of politics in a way to make sure that he's going to win over Huangi. And as one of his cronies told us before another election, he said, you have to remember Stalin's memorable dictum. It does not matter how they vote. What matters is how the votes are counted. Now, the organization of, I think I'm getting, I want to tell you a couple of anecdotes about the character of the man, which will actually explain to you the total cynicism of this guy. Perhaps the latest one was when the Reverend Jesse Jackson and Rod Blagojevich, congressman from Chicago, went to free these 3 prisoners of war in Belgrade. And they came to the palace, and Milošević started ranting and raving. He said, you know, I have such bad publicity. I'm fighting 2 wars. One is war against NATO, but the other one is the public relations war, and it's awful and so forth. And Jackson said to him, look, you know, you're not doing that badly. He says 2 days ago, Congress did not endorse bombing of Yugoslavia. The vote was 213 to 213. And he said, my son voted against the administration. He's a Democrat. And he said, turning to Rod Blagojevich, he says, your homeboy here, he had the swing vote. So Milošević did not understand the word homeboy. So they tried to explain to him, and once he did, he turned to Blagojevich, and he said, you didn't stay to vote? Assuming that Blagojevich was going to vote the Serbian way. Although Rod had said in advance that he was going to support the administration. And he said, I did not want to argue because at this point we wanted to get the soldiers out. So he said, what I did is I said, well, look, I had to come to see you and so forth. And Milošević was incredulous. He told me, you didn't vote? And he said from that point on, he disregarded him completely. And then he took Reverend Jackson into the yard of the palace. Garden, it's called, I guess. And he said to Jackson, he says, how about me giving you just one of those guys? He said, the guy who's got a young daughter. And Jackson said, impossible, but he's white. The other 2 guys were Hispanics. I mean, I think this gives you kind of an idea of a man. And there's another story which is even more powerful in a sense. And we were in Belgrade when there was a woman from California, from Los Angeles, who was married to a Serb immigrant who had a criminal record, could not get a green card, went back to, she divorced him, and he kidnapped 2 kids and went to Yugoslavia. The courts awarded her custody. He ignored it. She went to Yugoslavia. The Supreme Court of Serbia awarded her custody. All our high officials, from Secretary of State Baker down raised this question. Milošević said, look, you know, I can't do anything. These are laws and so forth and so on. She pleaded here and there, nothing. A day before the sanctions were going to be imposed in 1992, at the end of May, she was in a restaurant in Belgrade when she was summoned by police. Police came and said, the president wants to see you. So she went there and she said, he talked to me like, he said, I'm talking to you like your father. He said, I've been able to locate your kids. He said, they're in the town of Dachau. He said, you better go quickly. Now, Shana was Jewish. Dachau was a place where a famous concentration camp during the war. She had the presence of mind to call some friends who called Interpol, who called German police. They searched. This information was untrue. Playing with people like that is terrible. And then 2 years later, we were actually at the embassy, because this was the place where we ate lunch, the snack bar. And our chargé said, are you working today? I said, no, we're not working. I'll never. He said, Milošević called me this morning, and he said, he's going to deliver those kids at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he had called Shana, and the kids were out because he wanted to curry favor. I'm getting very epic here, and I would like to just end here because I haven't had a chance to discuss the roots of his policy, but I assume this is going to come up in the question and answer period. What I want to say is that Serbia under Milošević has, in a sense, is like a Y2K problem. It is like its computers have not been reset to move ahead to year 2000, and instead it gone back, restarting the year 1900. So that instead of a linear history, this history becomes circular and somehow never crossing into a better and changed world. I think that we bear a part of responsibility for this. And I'll stop here and have my wife take over.
Let me first say that I'm very honored to be speaking here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, the Washington's premier center of learning, as our book is published. As you'll see from the title, Milošević, Portrait of a Tyrant, we're no fans of the Serbian dictator. As Dusko pointed out, with a Yugoslav Mandela or Václav Havel in power, everything could have been very different. 10 years ago, when I returned to Belgrade to report on the Balkans for the London Sunday Times, Yugoslavia seemed to me a place with a future. It really seemed best positioned to make the jump from a communist dictatorship to democracy. Marshal Tito had made it the freest communist country in Eastern Europe. And his legacy, amazingly, had held in the 9 years since his death. Under Tito, as I'm sure you all know, Yugoslavs have been allowed to travel, work abroad, given most freedoms, providing they didn't criticize Tito or provoke nationalism. In fact, it hardly seemed like a communist country. I remember the late Cy Sulzberger at the time saying, sure, Tito is a Marxist. The thing is, his dogma is that of Groucho, not Karl. And Milošević started out, as we show in the book, he first wanted to be Tito. He even started wearing white summer suits that Tito used to wear, the very debonair Tito. He exchanged his cigarillos for Tito-style Havana cigars. When addressing select groups, he even adopted Tito's standard ending, "I wish you success in future work." The problem was Milošević was no Tito. I'll just read you our summary of this. By temperament and experience, Milošević was not the man to assume Tito's burden. It was too heavy for him. He was a tactical genius, but without a strategic sense. He was too secretive. Diplomats who negotiated with him said there were never more than 2 or 3 other persons inside the cavernous, gloomy presidential building. He lacked Tito's broad concept of Yugoslavia and its place in the world. He was not a natural diplomat. He seemed incapable of entering into the minds of his neighbors or understanding their fears. Rather, his arrogance inspired fears in others. On a different level, the man was a perfect expression of communism's failure to nurture new generations of competent and imaginative officials. He was far more ambitious and ruthless than communists from Tito's generation. His was a new type of dictatorship, a television dictatorship backed up by police. But now, after 12 years in power, Milošević has left a far greater imprint on the age than Tito. And he's dragged the United States and Europe, albeit unwillingly, into the mess he's created in 4 wars in Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. American, British, and other troops are deployed in 3 of ex-Yugoslavia's 6 republics: Bosnia, Macedonia, and Serbia, Kosovo still being part of Serbia. The United States, Britain, and other countries have undertaken what seems to be a practically open-ended commitment to keep the peace. Apart from the military expenditures, which run into billions of dollars annually, substantial economic costs are involved. And let's keep in mind that these areas are not economically self-sufficient. Now, what do we have as a stated aim of Western governments? It is to remove Slobodan Milošević, the indicted war criminal. Until he is gone, the argument runs, Serbia, ex-Yugoslavia, indeed the whole of the Balkans, will be unstable. It seemed a simple matter, though. After 3 months of NATO bombing earlier this year, the Serbian people were expected to see the light, rise up against their hated dictator, and remove him. Democracy would rush in, and to give them an extra push, no aid or reconstruction is on offer to Serbia until he's out of power. Problem is, it hasn't worked this way, and it rather begs the question, have we seriously misread Milošević and also the Serbian people? I personally believe so. What may seem rational from the outside to the policymakers in Washington or London is not necessarily going to work. To be on the ground in Milošević's Serbia, and I've spent many years there, is to enter another world. To me, a rather Alice in Wonderland sort of place. We detail in the book the ways in which Milošević remains in power, particularly through television and the use of his police force. In fact, there's 1 policeman for every 100 citizens, which is one of the highest ratios in the world. But let me give you something of a feel for this. The lies his media puts out may seem shameless to the outside world, but they create a reality that's become a sort of normality within Serbia. And it's not only happened in Serbia, it has happened in other countries in the world. I have a friend who lived in Argentina during the dictatorship, Sonia Ruslo of CNN television, and she said to me, you know, even though we understood that what was on television and the propaganda wasn't quite right, somehow because there was nothing to counter it unless you tried very hard, it was very hard not to slip into at least accepting it in some part. What goes for public discourse in Serbia is sometimes incredible. Take Milošević's hated wife, Mira Marković, for example. I remember when I was there, she and the wife of opposition figure Vuk Drašković had a debate in 2 newspapers. Danica Drašković asserted, and I quote, that it would be impossible to find a physician in Serbia or in the world who would certify that the Milošević couple are normal, adding that Mira was schizophrenic and the bastard product of wild partisan orgies in the woods. Mira had accused Danica of hysteria and called her an unfulfilled woman who has the mannerisms of half-wild cattle herdsmen and highwaymen who steal baggage and kidnap children. Gives you some idea. It's an extreme example, but still. Milošević's media in recent days has been accusing paramilitaries and thugs in Kosovo, not his army, of carrying out the killings that took place there. And he had earlier made the same claims of atrocities in Bosnia and in Croatia. This has also given him the excuse to make a wave of arrests, including of some people he said had been hired by French intelligence to assassinate him. This is Milošević's regular pattern, all the accusations and intrigues and so on. What he's doing right now is waiting for the next American president. He's been telling his recent visitors that a Bush or other administration would start off with a different agenda. Saddam Hussein, after all, is still in power. Perhaps Milošević is right. The attention span of Western democracies can be very short. But even if his calculations are not right, he has to tell his people that changes are imminent. He's fighting for his life. He certainly doesn't intend to give up power. Where would he go? If he remains in Serbia but not as its leader, his many enemies will make sure he's rubbed out. If he leaves Serbia, he can be sent to The Hague to face war crimes charges. Staying in power is all that matters to him. Western policies have only made this more imperative for him. Hence, if we'd like to see him removed, we should think about other ways of dislodging him, since the current method is clearly not working. To digress momentarily, forensic psychologists we consulted surmised that Milošević is a cold man, a depressive, scarred by a family history of suicide and abandonment. Some even suggested he could be playing out a scenario known as suicide by cop, in which individuals provoke others to kill them. Certainly he's instigated mighty forces, external and internal, against him. The psychologists believe he lives in a narcissistic, self-centered place where he's the sun and everything revolves around him. He doesn't think about what he'll be doing 5 years from now because he doesn't expect to live that long. Indeed, he seems not to care what happens after he's gone, not about his legacy or his children, and certainly not his people. But he takes great pleasure in the attention he receives on the world stage. With respect to his people, NATO has unexpectedly helped him keep control. Let me tell you the latest joke doing the rounds in Belgrade. Marko Milošević, his race car driving son, dies in a car accident and goes to hell. There, he encounters Milošević, Bill Clinton, and Tony Blair. Clinton and Blair are up to their necks in muck, but Milošević is only up to his ankles. "Hey, Dad, you didn't do so badly after all," says Marko. "Shh," says his father, "I'm standing on your mother's shoulders." Good joke, but it also expresses something. People in Serbia right now dislike Milošević and his hated wife Mira, who they refer to as the Red Witch or the Red Queen. There's lots of indicators, but, and this is important, they equally dislike NATO because this is the alliance which bombed them. There's no focus for their discontent and no clear alternative for Milošević. They're not in a mood to rise up and overthrow him, particularly in a time of economic deprivation in which the average salary is around $45 a month. In the past, it could have been different. In sporadic demonstrations beginning in 1991 through to 3 months in the winter of discontent, as it was known, of 1996 to 97, and led mainly by young people, there was a real push for change and democratization. There was a chant at demonstrations, "Slobo, Slobo, neka, neka, Ceausescu tebe čeka," which is "Slobo, just you see, Ceausescu is waiting for you," which is, he's going to suffer the same fate as Nicu Ceausescu, who was killed by his people in 1989, along with his hated wife, Elena. The United States and Western European countries were held up as the ideal at that time. But now an estimated 100,000 to 300,000 of the best and the brightest have left. The educated, informed men and women once in high positions of government are no longer there. Milošević has brought a gangster class to power. At the grassroots level, people in Serbia feel disillusioned and disheartened. They feel demonized and punished by NATO. Their mythology of victimization has been reinforced, and Milošević has grown stronger internally. A big question should now be asked. Is the present policy of isolation and sanctions going to achieve Milošević's removal from power? Sanctions have certainly not removed Cuba's Fidel Castro, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, or Iraq's Saddam Hussein. What if Milošević, like them, still rules over his repressed and impoverished people years from now? He certainly has that in mind. He once told Milan Panic in a drunken moment, which may have been an insight into how he sees himself, "I am the Ayatollah Khomeini of the Serbs. They will follow me anywhere." This is a question increasingly exercising European countries. Serbia is in Western Europe's backyard. Its isolation is damaging, particularly in the immediate neighborhood. Danube traffic's been halted by bomb bridges, there's no direct trade, transit routes between Europe and the Middle East which pass through Serbia no longer function. In the absence of the Cold War, it was a great feat to hold NATO together during the bombing campaign. That unity behind the scenes is now crumbling fast over what to do. Several Western European countries would like to send humanitarian and other aid to Serbia to reconstruct Danube bridges. They include the Italians, Greeks, Austrians, Germans, and French, plus the Scandinavians. Britain, America's chief ally in Europe, is holding America's hard line, but the splits could become wide and quite damaging by next summer. And there are other ominous problems which even President Clinton alluded to when he visited Kosovo last week. The Albanians in Kosovo have become so radicalized that there's now ethnic cleansing going on in reverse. Some estimates even put the number of Serbs killed by Albanians in Kosovo as reaching the number of Albanians killed by Serbs before the NATO bombing began. Of the scores of people we interviewed who have at some point or other been close to Milošević, and he never keeps people close for long, apart from his wife, many repeat what seems to be his recurring theme, that the whole world is against the Serbs, the Albanians, the Croats, the Muslims, NATO. It's his actions, though, that have made this a self-fulfilling prophecy. What now looms is a very real possibility of a new war in the Balkans, not just Milošević making mischief in Montenegro, Vojvodina, or the Sanjak, as he may well, but a future Albanian push for a greater Albania, a union of Kosovo, Albania proper, and parts of Macedonia. I don't know what the answer is, how to end the Milošević threat, but it seems to me that the United States and Europe should start thinking of a more far-sighted strategy to what could achieve stability in the region rather than the present radicalization. In the book, we detail the many missed opportunities for containing or even getting rid of Milošević, the ways in which the Western democracies seriously misread his intentions and his character. I'd like to see now some more imaginative thinking about Milošević and the region, taking into account his psychology and the reality on the ground. He should be manipulated with thoughts to long-term goals, not short-term punishment. Some ideas are out there, a new Berlin conference, redrawing borders, for example, or involving such organizations as the Soros Foundation to help build a civil society, perhaps even constructive engagement like America's relationship with China, even after the brutalities of Tiananmen Square. And I was in that square on June the 4th, 1989, and heard afterwards how all Western countries said they would never again do business with the butchers of Beijing. So what about the butcher of the Balkans? What's for certain is that Milošević is not a man to go quietly. He is the Saddam Hussein of Europe, doomed to wreak havoc and go to war, as he's done repeatedly already, in order to preserve his own power and distract his people's attention from repression and poverty. As long as he remains, he'll be an impediment to stability in the Balkans. In little more than a decade, he's brought post-Cold War Europe back to the matters that dominated the beginning of the 20th century and led to World War I. In the process, he's brought uncertainty to Europe at the dawn of the 21st century. We should evolve a more thoughtful and effective approach based on an understanding of the man and the peoples of the region. Otherwise, I dread to think what late 21st century historians will be writing.
Well, thank you very much, the both of you, for very provocative and interesting analysis, much of which I have to say personally I could agree with. I apologize for the Arctic blasts once again that are coming around this room. I think those of you who have attended these in the past know we're wrestling with this problem, but it's not so simple just for us to fix it. It has to go through the government bureaucracy, and sooner or later, maybe about the time we get rid of Milošević, they'll have these air dispersal mechanisms. And so I apologize. I now open the floor for questioning, for questions. Please go to either of the two microphones and just state your name and affiliation if you have one. Any questions? Jack Seymour.
I'm Jack Seymour with the British American Security Information Council, and I'm interested in the missed opportunities that you mentioned. Could you elaborate on that? Cite 2 or 3 of those for us. Thank you.
Yeah, there are many, but I think one of them was after the Dayton Peace Accords. Milošević had ostracized the Bosnian Serbs. And he had seen himself as, in negotiations with Richard Holbrooke, as the man who could bring peace to the Balkans, the guarantor of peace. He believed that after Dayton, what remained of Yugoslavia would be brought into the United Nations, into the world community. But it became clear to him, and he felt that Holbrooke had made him promises that he didn't follow through on, And I think that had this happened, he would not have turned towards China and begun his campaign in Kosovo. I think that this was definitely a missed opportunity.
92.
Yeah, and also, I personally believe that the British policy in Yugoslavia in the mid-1990s, which was one of constructive engagement, would have brought what the British felt, and the British do, after all, have a lot of experience with the empire. They felt that it would be better for long-term stability to encourage the kind of institutions in Serbia and in the region that would ensure a transition and stability post-Milošević, encouraging trade unions, encouraging all these institutions. And there was a carrot and stick approach, and businessmen went there. But unfortunately, the United States was very much opposed to this and felt that...
May I add something?
Sure.
I think this is a perfect case of that demonstrates that the United States does not have a foreign policy, but it's an extension of domestic politics. In 1991 or 1990, when the situation became heated in the Balkans, we probably had a unique situation because we had at the top of the government, National Security Advisor and Deputy Secretary of State and Secretary of State, two people who were real experts on Yugoslavia. Brent Scowcroft got his PhD on Yugoslavia. Plus, he served in Yugoslavia as military attaché. Larry Eagleberger was an expert's expert. But I think, and we quote Brent, who I think the most revealing quote, perhaps, about American policy in this book of that period, is when Scowcroft says, well, at the height of the crisis, Bush would come to him and say, tell me, Brent, what is this whole thing about? And he would do it once a week. So in other words, we did not want to get involved. And once we did want to get involved, we never actually wanted to, we never wanted to work with Europeans. There's a problem of being alpha male of NATO, that you want everybody to do what you tell them to do.
I also believe that there was not a real, after the 5 decades of the Cold War, there was, I don't think anybody quite understood that there could be nationalist wars in Europe, because we had become lulled into the certainties and the fixed positions of the Cold War.
Vic Perica.
My name is Vic Perica. Suppose that NATO troops leave Kosovo and Milošević calls the Serbian people to reconquer the province, or his wife calls the Serbian people in her column to support military reconquest of the province. Do you think that the Serbs would follow them?
My feeling on this is the following. The Kosovo issue, if we just look in this century, has not been resolved. Trotsky was correspondent in 1912 in Kosovo when the Serb army went there for the first time after they lost it in the 14th century. And he quotes Serbian officers, what they did when they went in there. Killing, pillaging, burning. It's 1912. So they moved in. In 1915, during World War I, the Serbs were defeated, so the army had to go through Kosovo and Albania, all the way down to Corfu and then to Tunisia. They suffered enormous losses on this journey, but a good part of them through Albanian revenge. So another cycle of revenge came in 1918 when the Serbs, together with the French, came back to Kosovo and started killing and pillaging and burning and so forth. Then in 1941, the Albanians sided with the Nazis. They killed and expelled the Serbs and burned their villages and so on. So most recent you have, the Serbs, it was a police rule in Kosovo, and Albanians now engaging in revenge. What's the tragedy of our action, and I favored military action, I must say that, because I think you have to deal with nasty people and you have to remove them. But unfortunately, we did not remove Milošević. We did not want to commit ground forces. And the ending of the war was actually not a defeat for Mr. Milošević. If you look at the army leaving Kosovo, and I had a friend of mine who was our military attaché in Yugoslavia, this is not a defeated army. We're 160 destroyed tanks. They should be there, right? We have a real problem, and there's no political settlement. Nobody has signed anything. So as long as thing is not signed, sooner or later, there's going to be a cycle of revenge again, because nothing has been settled. Perhaps, perhaps some political settlement could have been reached to give the Serbs a little piece of real estate north, and but you have to deal with real people. But we haven't done that. And this is the unfortunate situation which perpetuates it. And it seems to me what you have in Albania, for the first, the Albanians have been short-shrifted throughout history, because they always sided with the wrong people who lost. This is the first time in their history they sided with the winner. Plus, they have a young and well-educated intelligentsia, and they're scattered in various places, including northern Greece. So these questions are bound to come up. So I think your premise is sort of you're a scholar, but you're asking a journalistic question.
We have this gentleman, and that lady. I think, did you have a question? And then Vic, and then Chris Jones.
Tom Switzer, Foreign Service Officer, retired. I congratulate you both on the book. You reveal some nuances about Milošević that are very interesting. The Macedonian question, as always, acts as a Gordian knot in the Balkans. Page 189 of your book, you make an interesting observation that in May of '93, Milošević flew to Lake Ohrid, Macedonia, to meet with the Macedonian leaders in secret, the newly independent Macedonia. He and Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis had considered dismembering Macedonia the previous year, '92, dividing between Greece and Serbia. But Mitsotakis, you say, had felt constrained by Greece's membership in NATO and the EU. And the U.S. then, knowing of the plan and trying to prevent it, sent in 700 troops to Macedonia. That obviously was a very serious and nefarious plot that two sovereign countries would attempt to dismember a newly declared and tenuous, but nonetheless sovereign Macedonia, recognized by the UN, I do believe, by that point in time. The question is, what evidence, basically, did you base your, did you draw upon on this, and how was it revealed? And the follow-up part of this, is there still any ongoing threat from Serbia to try to destabilize Macedonia?
I'll take the Serb part and she'll take the Greek part. Milošević publicly proposed federation between Greece and Serbia. Publicly. Front banner headline. You do not do that unless there's something behind it, unless you have discussed it with the Greeks. You should agree to that. And there's this territory between them on which they both have pretensions. I've never seen such uproar in Greece, because we used to go to Greece that's where we did shopping, in northern Greece. And we had contacts with high-level Greeks too, and I'll let Louise explain what was their thinking, why didn't they do it?
Well, they are constrained. I mean, there's two things.
Use the image.
I like the image that Warren Zimmerman, the last American ambassador, has of Macedonia. He calls it Little Mac, squeezed between the giant hamburger buns of Serbia and Greece. Which shows the worry that the United States had, even back then. I have another friend who's a Greek academic who uses the image of Greece is like Jason being lashed to the ship, as the siren songs call, and the ship and the lashes of the European Union. This has constrained Greece so far from becoming involved. But you saw just recently the demonstrations that went on in the streets. So I also think that the European Union membership is one of the things that should be looked at as a carrot for the countries of the region, which could get them to be more civilized as Greece's behavior has been.
But let me go back to your second question, which also... Greeks are very concerned about northern... See, because if you look at the Carnegie Commission report of 1913 or 14, they talk about ethnic cleansing of purely Albanian areas carried out by the Greeks and the Serbs. And the Greeks have been extremely worried about northern frontier because they've recognized it under Tito. They've recognized the name Macedonia because they've never even imagined that it would be possible that Macedonia would become a state. And I remember once I spent an afternoon with Karamanlis when he was prime minister, and I said to him, what do you consider yourself? He said, I'm a Macedonian, because he was from northern Greece. So the policy that they have pursued up there is, for instance, and this extended also to the communists during the Civil War. All the Slavs, Slavophonie as they say, had to change their names. And there were these communists who died in northern Greece, and their relatives go down there, but they have Greek names on their tombs. But the problem with the Albanians is far more serious because Yanina, as you know, was the capital of southern Albania. So the territorial claims, disintegration of Macedonia would bring territorial claims that would inevitably lead to war. Inevitably. And quite frankly, it's difficult to see how, under present circumstances and with the current policies, there's going to be a Macedonia, say, 5 years down the road.
And as you know, almost a third of the citizens of Macedonia are of Albanian origin, and we have spent a lot of time with them. And they expressed to us a feeling that they were living under an apartheid system, that there's that on the ground, the discrimination against Albanians, who have already at one point declared their own state, is great. So I think there is this pressure, particularly if the KLA is becoming so radicalized, that you could see a push for a Greater Albania to include that. And that also involves, the question is, if Kosovo is recognized an independent country, that's going to make more pressures for this area of Macedonia. So, and we were talking to a senior British official who's involved in the area recently, and he said he would be surprised if Macedonia exists in 5 years, which was surprising to me, but that shows you how much concern there is.
Thank you. Just as a footnote to that, just before this meeting, I was reading that the ruling coalition in Macedonia is about to fall apart, and Tuperkovsky's going to take his people out, and then you have the election irregularities in Western Macedonia. So,
I just want to add sort of an anecdotal piece of evidence. You know, we went to see the police minister in Macedonia, Mr. Frčkovski. He's a wonderful guy, a professor of law. And I said to him, you know, how many Albanians on your police force? Because when we go to these Albanian areas, there are no Albanian policemen. And in a Balkan country, this is a very important symbol. Well, he said, 2-3%. I said, those ladies that brought coffee or cleaning ladies in the ministries, does this count as this percentage? Because it's very difficult to find an Albanian policeman. Because if you have an ethnic state, you know, you want to control police. In Serbia, it's impossible to have a policeman who's not a Serb. That's just out of the question. Or in Croatia, that's to be a non-Croat in the police. This, maybe cleaning ladies.
Hi, my name is Ilona Peterson, and I work for Medical Service Corporation International. You mentioned that European countries are anxious to start providing humanitarian assistance to the area. I wondered whether you are aware of any NGOs that are active, European NGOs, and what the role of the Serbian Orthodox Church is.
No, I'm not. As you know, the European Union has remained with America with the hard line. There is this program of which is called Energy for Democracy, where the European Union wants to deliver oil to 2 towns in Serbia run by the opposition, but Milošević has now held that oil up at the border, so he's sort of nixing that. But I don't know of any NGOs who are involved there. I do know of churches in the United States which have wanted to provide assistance, but which have been forbidden from doing so.
Yeah, we know of a Lutheran organization, a Catholic organization, that wanted to provide relief to Serbs in Kosovo, and the United States government denied that.
The Orthodox Church within Serbia?
I really don't know.
The United States get involved in this attempt to prevent a partition of Macedonia. You talked about one of the several internal ethnic problems inside Macedonia. You didn't mention at all the point of departure on that question, the American force that was put in there, and that also relates to the auspices under which that force was inserted. So maybe you could talk about the United Nations, maybe you could talk about multilateralism, talk about the European forces that got involved in there. So I guess I'm reframing the question as that of the interaction between internal ethnic conflicts, disintegrative tendencies, and the types of pressure that come from the outside, the types of institutions that act from the outside to sustain a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-confessional political entity.
I think, this is a topic for a conference, not for an answer, but I'll be very brief. There's a difference in what is desirable and what's possible in politics. And we as a society in this country, which is based on a multi-ethnic principle, simply cannot get political support, even if the government wanted to support purely ethnic countries and ethnic cleansing and stuff like that. It's virtually impossible. On the other hand, if you're a realist, we did that after World War II. There were huge ethnic cleansings of Germans from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, you name it, Romania. You're talking about millions of people who have lived there for 5, 6 centuries, who were expelled. And the problem was solved. There was an exchange of population between Greece and Turkey in 1921, or 2022, 23. And the problem was resolved. However, it's a different age. Today, we live in an age where you have a 24-hour television. Such actions are simply impossible. And I think that, personally, I think to accept the notion that people cannot live together is somehow defies human spirit. Because, it is, you can argue that in a region like the Balkans, which is fragmented and tossed and torn by these various forces, living together is an uncommon act. Because Albanians speak Albanian, these are Muslims, these are Croats, these are, various religions and so forth. But this is precisely the point, because civilization is not natural. Civilization just doesn't happen. It's an accomplishment of will. So how can we help these people who are caught in the cycle of retribution? Certainly not the way we're doing. We are bribing various groups in the societies. We are bombing without an ultimate objective being reached. These people are dispensable people. Nobody cares. I care because, my mother is a refugee from Albania, and my father is a Montenegrin Serb. I always identified with the Serbs. And I'm an American, proud of it. So look at the conflict that I faced there. These two people are killing each other, and my own country is going and bombing them both and lying about it. On top of it, saying this and that. And there's no outcome, no clear outcome. Of course, when I see the refugees, Albania, I'm on their side. I can see my grandparents crossing that border, I don't know when, because they were forced to flee. So there's this endless cycle of violence, and what do? People who deal with it here have no clue what are the conflicts and how should we. I mean, we have Madeleine Albright saying in Serbian, appealing to them, making nonsensical statements. And if you look at these poor people, and I can tell you another thing, which is a big problem in this town, because we take elections seriously. I've heard every politician in this town saying Milošević has been elected. I can tell you Serbian people never would elect Milošević, except in 1990 when he was first time elected because he was a nationalist, he was popular. In 1991, he couldn't go in the streets. We lived in the neighborhood where he lives for 6 years. For 6 years, we have never seen his limousine because he's afraid of assassination. So your question, which is an excellent question, of course, cannot be answered, in any other way.
But I also think that what I have seen is a tremendous disconnect between policymakers and the people on the ground. And I think that the imposing the solutions on them as we have tried to do has been counterproductive. You just have to look at Bosnia. And I was listening to a State Department official touting how wonderfully Bosnia is working and how the 3 presidents have sat down and signed a document, and this means that everything is wonderful. And then I listened to somebody who's been there with I think it's called the Crisis Group, who talks about how desperate it is on the ground, because what you have in Kosovo, in Bosnia, is a situation where it isn't working on the ground, where the economy is totally dependent on donor contributions, which are now going to be reduced by 50%. The divisions that existed between the Serbs and between the Muslims and still Croats, even though there's a Muslim-Croat Federation, are as deep as ever. Just go to Srebrenica, which was the symbol of the worst atrocities of the Bosnian War. The people haven't returned to Srebrenica. There are a few Muslims who have been elected, and they spend a few hours a day there, protected by international forces. But in the Muslim houses, there are Serbs living, and there's no resolution internally. And I think that everything we have done has radicalized the situation, and I think that perhaps it wouldn't be such a bad idea to have some sort of conference in which all the participants sat down and tried to redraw and work out something that's going to work on the ground. Because the solutions that I see being worked out in Washington, in London, look terrific on paper. Doesn't work. And we are pouring so much money in because these are not economically viable countries.
I would like to add, because we sound like we are trying to demolish U.S. government from this podium. I don't believe for a moment that there's anybody in the American government who wants to do harm. I don't believe for a moment that, that there's a plot to do this and that. Most people at the time of the Bosnian War didn't even know there were Muslims in Bosnia. There's not a single dissertation on Bosnia, I believe, at American universities, certainly until 1964, 65. There's a great deal of ignorance and good intentions. But I used to cover Canada, and remember Trudeau talking about the problems that you have with America, even when their intentions are the best. Or sometimes they don't do anything, it's a problem. You know, he used to say, it's like sleeping next to an elephant. When an elephant has happy dreams, he turns around and crushes you. Doesn't want to. So in the Balkan Sea, where all these people are sitting and saying, you know, what is the United States going to do? Because to a Balkan man, it's impossible, it's inconceivable, say, to a Greek, that the president of the United States doesn't get up in the morning and thinks about the Greek question or whatever the Greek question of the day is, or Serb, or, you know, Albanian. They think, actually people focus on this. And we have a desk officer somewhere, you know, thinking he knows it, but nobody listens to the desk officer. Nobody listens to it. We do have know-how. We do have people who actually know. But the political decisions are made at a level where people don't know.
We have about 15 minutes left. We have 5 people have asked for questions, and I think we'll, among others, and we'll close it at that. And I'll tell you who they are, even though I don't know your names. We'll start with a gentleman back there, then in the rear, and work our way down this aisle in the striped shirt, then you, sir, and then finally you. So, please.
My name is Marian Zulean. I'm Woodrow Wilson intern. So I like the way of your presentation with anecdotes, and I'm going to put a question in the same way. I heard the Danish historian telling that the way in what Denmark became peaceful was from the aggressive Viking time to the peaceful Denmark was by shrinking the territories, territorial shrinking. On the other hand, by the same token, I just read a joke or anecdote in Time on Mira Markovic and Milošević in their house. They heard some noise, and Mira asking Slobodan, what's there? And Slobodan said, don't worry, it's just border patrol patrolling our country. So, the same. I would like to ask you, how do you foresee the future of Serbia for the next 5 years in the respect of these jokes, anecdotes? The Serbia and the former Yugoslav republics, or can you foresee, territorial federation or something?
I think the Serbs are a strong nation. I mean, they've been destroyed practically by this man. Had Mr. Milošević, and that's when I want to come back to Vic Peretz's question, had Mr. Milošević in 1991 said, yes, we want to take this, I call on you to do it, the Serbs could have taken over Yugoslavia. They're strong, they had the military capacity, they're good soldiers. But what Mr. Milošević did is, he said Serbia is not at war. He sent in paramilitaries, gangsters, I mean, this was not a war that Serb nation fought. It was a Serb nation lost it, yes. And the amount of resistance to Milošević was enormous. And I just want to read you one thing, if I may, because it's kind of dramatic, because it talks about, it's at a time when, in May of 1992, when there was enormous demonstrations against Milošević, and he had to, because of the war in Bosnia. People opposed the war in Bosnia. And Milošević went on television to reassure everybody, and he said, Serbia is not at war. Not a single soldier who is a citizen of the Republic of Serbia is outside Serbia's borders. This is May 1922. And to give you just one example, and notice in the main newspaper, Politica, because death notice, 6 months later, gives the name of a man, born July 5, 1972, freshman class, engineering faculty, and so forth. And the parents write, he died on May 23rd, 1992, in the suburbs of Mostar, which is in Bosnia and Herzegovina. At a time when, quote, Serbia was not at war, unquote. At a time when, quote, not a single soldier who's a citizen of the Republic of Serbia was outside Serbia's border, unquote. And they asked the question then, so who killed their son? His unfortunate young adversary, the Muslim sniper, or his general? General being Mr. Milošević. The thing is that I think that we started the 20th century in Europe, which led to a war, with the definition of Serbia's borders, the nature of its leadership. It led to the First World War. We end the century without these borders being defined, and with a new threat of Albanians trying to define themselves. So I can tell you with a great deal of assurance that war is going to come there unless something is done about it. And what can be done? You know, that's a topic for another seminar.
Yes, sir.
Mihailo GW. 2 weeks ago in New York Times book review, it was published one article about your book, and it was typical killer review. I found it very unjust, is what he said. I believe that it is possible to criticize you, but from opposite point of view. How you can comment this killer review?
It hurts. It hurts. I mean, the New York Times is the mother of American journalism. I've been a journalist all my life, so it's something I couldn't understand. But the only way I can answer is, the review was written by a guy who is a specialist in Romania, who doesn't know much about Serbia or Yugoslavia. He's never worked there. And it is like asking an orthopedic surgeon to perform an operation on your eye. I mean, you may be an excellent orthopedic surgeon, but I wouldn't let you operate my eye. I mean, that's about why this is done and how is something of a miss. Maybe because I was associated with the Washington Post, and Washington Post people get bad press in the New York Times.
Okay, sir, yeah, you in the back. David Rogers, retired civil servant. Ms. Branson, you made several references to a New Berlin conference, redrawing the boundaries of the Balkans. Could you speculate on what sort of countries should be created, since some of them in former Yugoslavia, like Macedonia or Bosnia, are really things Tito created in gerrymandering Yugoslavia? So who would get what? And of course, nobody said a word yet today about the Hungarians. So who would get what, where, do you think, for having something workable?
Well, gerrymandering is the defining term of the Balkans over past centuries of gerrymandering of borders, and certainly, Tito's borders were not drawn necessarily that fairly, and largely were drawn to keep the largest nation, the Serbs, in check. I have no ideas. I think that all the participants, there should be all the peoples represented of the nations and the great powers. I don't know who should get what. I think it's a subject that should be thrashed out, taking a look at the reality on the ground, and trying to give some fairness, even though I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't be very happy. But I can't give you any definitive answers. I think they should. One idea is that they should. One that seems to me that is quite a good one is to have some sort of conference. It might work better than what's working now.
Where are the Habsburgs now that we need them?
Sir. Can you hear me? Yeah. Can you hear me all right? I recognize your plea for a broader, wiser policy, but would you answer a narrower question? Next week in this very room, we're going to hear The Hague's War Crime Tribunal problems and inequities. It seems to me a blatant failure has been in Bosnia, where indicted and perhaps highly suspect potential war crime people have not even been arrested. If this were part of an American policy, which we're not sure whether it is or not, but they've had plenty of time to do that. But how would you comment? Do you too approve of there being war crimes tribunal and trials, or is that beside the point? Is that focusing on the divisions rather than...
I think you have strong views on this.
I have strong views on this because, as I said, I admired Woodrow Wilson. I think to have a better world, you have to have an international crimes tribunal. The United States opposed a genuine international war tribunal, but we want war crimes tribunal for the Serbs and that. But that being beside the point, I think we have, used this as a policy tool. I mean, we know that Archon, for instance, is a criminal. And yet, he's accused of war crimes only this year, just before, because he's directly linked to Milošević. How can you have in a dictatorship a man who has a private army in the capital, with flies in a helicopter, has guns, and I mean heavy guns. And I've raised it with our diplomats there. I mean, who were my friends too. And I said, well, years ago, I said, why don't you indict this guy? Because that leads to Milošević. And the answer that I got from our charge d'affaires was, he's not a member of regular armed forces, which is kind of an insane answer. But he doesn't know what to say, because as long as we thought we could get something out of Milošević, we worked with him, and we kind of closed our eyes and said, and I think this is wrong. I think you don't deal with gangsters. You try to, I'll give you a scene, an unbelievable scene, and it was David Owen goes and he talks to Milošević. The year is 1993. And where Milošević actually engages in arranges the beating of the chief political opponent of his. And Vuk Drašković. And he and his wife have come midnight to their headquarters. Police comes in and beats them up unconscious in the office. Then they take them to the elevator, beat them up in the elevator, revive him, and he has to run a gauntlet from the building to the policeman, as police are kicking his wife and saying and yelling, "We've been waiting for you, you whore." And the whole neighborhood can hear it. It's midnight. And then Drašković described what happened. They got to the police station. He said, they kept pulling me by my hair so that my body would accelerate. He had long hair. And head would hit the wall with greater force. He thought that was the end. They revived him with buckets of water and slaps on the face. Asking, leader, he's leader of the opposition, leader, was this hard enough? I said, no, said Drašković. And then they repeated the whole thing. And when I recovered consciousness, the question was popped again. Was this hard enough? And I said with some impudence, you're not strong enough to do it properly so that I feel pain. And I don't remember anything after that, he said. And he was beaten so savagely, they put him in a neurological hospital. And Owen goes to see him. Mrs. Mitterrand comes. Everybody comes to intercede, get him out of the hospital, save the man's life. But Owen goes and negotiates with Milošević at the same time. Negotiations continue. The Western powers do not. I mean, you're dealing with a gangster, so he knows, as long as you talk to me, it's okay. And how does Drašković survive? He goes on a hunger strike. He says, and he is strong-willed. He decides the day on which he's going to die. He doesn't take water. And Mrs. Mitterrand and the Orthodox patriarch go there, and they say suicide is an anti-Christian act, and Drašković says, it's not suicide, I'm being killed. And when it came close to death, all of a sudden on the 10th day of the strike, the public opinion changed, and 42 people, including 20 members of parliament, began a hunger strike in central Belgrade, in the street. And only then Milošević realized that if he dies in prison, if he dies, then, this is dangerous for him, so he pardons him. But what this tells you is about Western policy, where we deal with it. Owen represents the West. We deal with a man who is doing this personally as a chief. He's micromanaging it. It gives you something about the character of this person that we wrote about. But it also raises the question about the leader of the opposition, Mr. Drašković, who, having been so severely beaten once, you begin to wonder whether he's ever going to be as fearless in his opposition again.
But I also think that on the questions of the War Crimes Tribunal, I think that the way that the indictments have been announced has also been something, it reflected the frustration of Western democracies or whoever, because I thought it was very unwise, one, to indict Mr. Milošević as a war criminal, and two, to indict the people around him who could be successors to him or who could remove him internally. There is the possibility of secret indictments, and they've been used for many people, and my question was why were they not secret indictments? It seemed that this was an act of anger. So even whether you agree with them or not, I think that the way that they've been announced and not implemented in the case of Karadzic and Mladic, leave some questions about the whole process too.
It's already 1:30. Our guests have been talking nonstop for an hour and a half. There's many questions still. I think, though, we'll have one last question back there who was supposed to go and somehow got passed over. And I'm sorry for those of you we haven't gotten to, but it's, I think, time. Plus, the Siberian winds, I think, are starting to blow again, having shifted for a while. So
at least they're Siberian, not Serbian.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Father Irine Debrijević, and I'm with the Office of External Affairs of the Serbian Orthodox Church here in Washington, newly established. I commend you on your presentation. I do look forward quite a bit to reading your book. I have a question on a matter of perception, which you touched upon, and it's predicated on something which President Woodrow Wilson himself, if memory serves me correctly, said in 1918, where he asked for all church bells throughout America to ring on June 28th, being the anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo, Vidovdan, in honor of the Serbs who are fighting not only for their own independence, but for the freedom of the whole world. And the Serbian people as a whole have always felt themselves traditionally allied with America. And it's very difficult for the Serbian people to understand how it is not possible for America, the Western powers in general, to delineate between the Serbs as a people and Milošević as a person, as their leader, whom they don't care for, as you clearly have indicated. And this has been reiterated time in and time out by all levels of U.S. government, that this war is not waged against the Serbian people, yet, of course, they feel the repercussions of that. My question is specifically about this matter of perception, in that the Serbian people, because of this, precisely because of this, feel that perhaps Milošević is still working in tandem with the American government, with the Western powers, that he is, quote unquote, their man. And this, in great part, I believe, psychologically, reduces their ability to fight against him further. As you know, they have so many times, and they keep losing every time. Could you please comment on this?
I think talking about perceptions in the Balkans, I touched on it earlier, what Balkan people feel about various powers and so forth. You know, in 1992, there was a serious plot against Milošević, led by nationalists who were his supporters. In fact, you know, and they approached, first of all, they approached the Russian Duma, then the CIA, then the KGB, then the French, then the British. You know, this is the way they operate. And in fact, Ambassador Zimmerman, in his memoirs, recalls how the man who was totally identified with Milošević, the number 2 man in Bosnia, came to his residence and proposed that they should get rid of Milošević, who should be president, and so forth. Zimmerman thought it was a plot and so forth. The problem of, you know, when you have a dictatorship, and when you have a man who actually controls everything, the nation kind of assumes the coloration of the dictator. The government does. We quote a guy here who was the deputy prime minister of Serbia, Prohaska, a very intelligent man, young man, who in 1991 said, well, we should, you know, everybody has hired public relations firms in the West, and he began negotiation with Saatchi and Saatchi. And he was fired by Milošević. Because to Milošević, it's impossible that anybody can present the Serbian case better than himself. There's a peculiar nature of the Serbs, too, which I unfortunately know in more ways than one, and that is that the Serbs actually do believe that if their cause is just, there's no need to explain it. And we live in a society where spin has become a part of everything. Everything is spin in this society, you know, from marketing goods to politics. And there's a certain arrogance in the Serbian character that, you know, they want to be treated with respect also, as equals. Look, you know, look why the American government has turned against Zoran Đinđić, who is, to my mind, a real option in Yugoslavia. Because when Đinđić was here and he talked to Miss Albright and so forth, and there was $20 million that belonged to the city government of Belgrade. He was opposition mayor of Belgrade at the time. And they promised that they would unlock those funds and release them. So 7 days later, they said, no, it can't be done when he got back to Belgrade. And then Secretary of State is coming to Belgrade, where she used to live as a child. And in fact, what's interesting, the Serbs served her family. I don't know whether you know that, but when her father was a diplomat in Belgrade, left for Prague, and the Nazis came to Prague in 1938, the Serb friends got him registered as Serbian correspondent in London. So he and the family left Prague via Belgrade and went to London as a Serbian newspaper correspondent. But that being said, so she was going to Belgrade. The mayor of Belgrade then in a huff says, no, he's not going to take her. A small country cannot afford that. A great country can you know, a country like the United States, you know, doesn't have to be friendly. I mean, because the sheer size, small countries need good diplomats. The Serbs, unfortunately, don't have that. And with this man, the shrinking of the country, to go back, is going to continue. As long as Milošević, if he stays there longer, the country is going to shrink further.
But I think that your description is a perfect description of the Alice in Wonderland sort of quality that I referred to, where there is so much propaganda and there are so many different plots on the television in the society that people don't know anymore what to believe. So they can perfectly believe that President Milošević is working with the Americans.
Well, thank you very much. Before I close this meeting, before you leave, I'd just like to make an announcement that's actually already been made, that a week from today, on November 8th, at 12 o'clock in this room, December 8th, excuse me, yes. Professor Robert Hayden of the University of Pittsburgh will be here talking about the Hague War Crimes Tribunal problems and inequities, and as its title indicates, it'll probably be very provocative and certainly a unique perspective. We welcome you to that. And now I'd like to thank our two co-authors for a very excellent and wonderful presentation, very interesting. And we'll all read the book and not read the New York Times review. Thank you.